Hello from wherever you are, and welcome back to the Impertinent Collector, Davide here. And just to warm up your interest, here are some fun facts. The most famous beach in Australia is Bondi Beach in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. And tourists and backpackers from around the world flocked to this long and beautiful beach facing the open sea, where there is always waves, just to cement themselves with, how can I say, the emotion of being a surfer for once in a lifetime. But what is mainly known to the locals is that on Bondi there is a persistent and strong undercurrent. And that is the reason why every year thousands and thousands of people are rescued by the lifeguards. And interesting enough, the majority of people that get rescued are experienced swimmers who saw that muscle, a bit of a physique, a bit of ego, but also technique and experience would enable them to safely get back to shore whenever they want. Well, why all this is relevant? Because in today's episode, I'm the one in need of urgent rescue. Because this is the scene. I find myself walking in the middle of a thick crowd, when all of a sudden somebody next to me starts shouting. And as I looked around, I realized that the crowd is no longer moving towards the same direction, but has created a circle around me, a sort of a vacuum. And the screaming person is pointing his finger at me in a very aggressive way. And he's shouting, "You are an infidel. Yes, you are an infidel." What's happening? They're all in the early 20s, all wearing a black tunic, all sporty a bushy and untrimmed dark beard. And so the accusation carries on. "You are American. You are American. Yes." It's a surreal scene. And at the peak of the accusation, "You are Jewish. Yes, you are Jewish." And guess what? Whilst I thought that I could use my dialectic prowess to get away with the first two accusations, the American, thanks to my strong Italian accent and the ability to speak Italian, as a matter of fact, and the fact that I was an infidel, I could take them down a philosophical journey. What is fate? How different are your set of beliefs from mine? But the accusation of being Jewish was a bit of a tricky one. Yes, because my parents didn't call me Riccardo, didn't call me Giorgio, didn't call me Antonio, didn't call me Francesco. They call me Davide. And apart from my brother-in-law is called Mosè, there is nothing more Jewish, also more biblical than Davide or David if you want. And that's where my brain immediately switched into survival mode. But how did I get there? Well, the people who know me well are familiar with the fact that no matter what the question, I have a tendency to provide an answer that is rooted in the past. And so here is no different. And if you want this hypothetical journey that started in Venice and took me to Persepolis, started in 1701, when one of these forgotten heroes by the name of Antoine Galland published in Paris a translation of some Arabic manuscript. And these manuscripts tell for the first time the story of a new character. And this character is Sinbad the sailor. Europe was taken by storm. And so he had to secure more ancient manuscripts that he had seen during his post in Constantinople. And him being a scholar of Arabic, he was able to translate them. And in the 1704 in Paris, for the first time, we have the first out of 12 books that will be later published, titled The 1001 Nights, also known as the Arabic Nights. An extraordinary compendium of fantastical stories. Such stories that in Europe have not been seen for probably a couple of thousand of years. And if you want to take in account the accessibility of books, since 200 years since the invention of the printing press. Yes, because the historical books that were telling a fanciful story that captured the imagination of adults, elderly, children, until then were the Bible, yes, the Old Testament, the Gospel, if you want. Then we had the books of Homer, so the Iliad and the Odyssey, and then you have the Metamorphoses of Ovidius. But here we have a compendium of stories where, yes, you have the king, yes, you have the princess and the princesses, yes, you have the Grand Vizier, and you have the ministers, and you have the sailors, the pirates, the slaves, the servant, but you also have an abundance of magic, an abundance of genii, an abundance of demons, an abundance in some cases of mechanical devices. We are tales of entire city underwater when the population was able to breathe through the water. You had mechanical machines that could travel outside the current world. And you have mystical portals that would take you in another dimension, instantaneously. And of course, you also have an abundance of elixirs, of potions, of magic rings, of amulets, of drugs. My God, what is happening? And so here has come to light the extraordinary adventures of thousands of characters that for the first time were described in such details within the daily life and within the society and the world they were part of, that people around the world could relate to. And of course, together with this experience and discovery that he was refreshing, he was also shocking. Shocking for the graphic description of sexual intercourse, sexual innuendo. There is a world when there are spices, there are fabrics, there are silks, there are exquisite marbles, but where also the naked body is an object of desire. And out of such desire, you will have the slaves sleeping with the king's wife, the wife poisoning the king or the grand vizier, the virgin daughter traveling in the middle of the night to have sex with some mysterious tribes. You can imagine the educator when they venture themselves in these extraordinary tales, one inside the other. And so we have the extraordinary characters of Sherazad, we have Sinbad, we have Ali Baba, we have Aladdin. And let me tell you, there's nothing to do with a watered-down version that the 1950s Disney fed us as children. No. Because another heroes of mine, an Englishman by the name of Richard Francis Burton, unhappy by the fact that Galland had removed both poetry and any reference to sex, published a far more accurate version of the original text. And it was such a scandal that they accused him of being a sex maniac, and the books were withdrawn from publication and could only be accessed by subscription. Yes, Richard Francis Burton, another extraordinary character, larger than life itself. But what's happening? Why the book was so fascinating and at the same time so controversial? Well, because the many tales that are part of the volumes, coming from different sources, of course find the origins, some in North Africa, some in Egypt, some in Persia, some in India, but it is specifically to a particular way of the Indian thinkers that had already studied the nature of men for thousands of years, and they have come to the conclusion that through the life of mankind, both women and men, there are three areas of focus. And to simplify, let's call them the 3D. Think David, thinks Davide. The first D is duty. Duty means an absolute pledge of obedience towards your father, towards your mother, towards your in-laws, towards your king, towards your general, towards the government, towards the tax office. I haven't said enough? Yes, a duty as a wife, a duty as a husband, a duty as a son, a duty as a daughter. Big, massive sphere that has been placed on our shoulder. But within that heavy sphere, there is the book and the bundles of the laws. And as you familiarize yourself with the laws and with the rules, here comes the second D. And so yes, there is duty, but there is also domination. Domination because man that has skill, intelligence, resources, and opportunities can now turn those rules to his advantage, can use these rules against his enemies, real and potential. He can have the rules cancelled. He can have rules that are rewritten. He can have rules that only apply to him. And basically, that's what I need in my life right now. And so that his obligations, his duty, can be carried out on his behalf by somebody else. How sublime! And to a certain extent, we had this already in the philosophical and sociological model of the Greek and then the Roman Empire. But here comes a third area, the third D. And the third D is desire. Oh, but not any desire. No. Because if you want the biggest palace, oh, that's domination. If you want status, that's domination. If you want the biggest boat, that's domination. If you want to be recognized as the richest ruler or richest merchant, that's domination. The third D is sexual desire, is the recognition that sex itself can be turned in the highest form of intellectual activity. Here is something that somehow had been lost to the point that in the version of Galland, poetry and reference to sexual innuendo, nudity, was immediately removed, but not in the version of Richard Francis Barton. And so these three areas, duty, domination, and desire, they are all in constant conflict with one another. And our life is lived through the balancing act between these three areas. So to the point that even my old dad, in the midst of Alzheimer, would still appreciate the young waitress serving him at the table. And if the owner or the owner's wife would come to serve him, he could say, I hope you don't mind, but next time, send me the younger waitress, over 80 years old. How magnificent to recognize the power of the human body in a sexual contest, something that Christianity has turned into a sin, something to be ashamed of, something that really relates to the royal realms of our capacity, our human beings. But that the Indian gurus had instead recognized and codified later in the famous book of the Kama Sutra as an extremely important part of our existence. My God, this is like inspiring, and is so charming in a way that one of the greatest educators at the time in England, he wrote an introduction to the massively watered down version of 1,000 Nights with a recommendation for both the parents and the children who come across the book. So to the parents, make sure this book is kept hidden from your children and is only allowed to children, boys and girls of extremely good nature. And you, my child, that might have found this book in a hidden compartment in your father or grandfather library, make sure not to read this book before going to sleep. Oh, God forbids that you have the vivid dreams that the education of the time was forbidding. And make sure that you don't read this book lying down. You need to sit at a desk. Make sure you don't read this book when you are alone. Make sure that other people are there and see what you are doing. And most importantly, that to me is the pearl of this rotten wisdom, make sure that you do not read this book in the morning lying in bed. Oh, please, if I could, I would run my kingdom from the comfort of my bed. Yes, so that's the story of how I found myself there. And so you can imagine, when my mom told me that there was the truly extraordinary opportunity to travel to Iran in 1999 under the invitation of the president of Iran himself, the Grand Ayatollah Khatami, and that we were part of a selected group when you have this professor of architecture at the University of Venice, his wife, my mom and my dad, they immediately joined the party. There was a guide that was Iranian living in Venice with his wife. I immediately clear my schedule and I jump to the opportunity. And so, how did I survive this extraordinary, mysterious world that was and still is Iran? Ah, what a country, what people, incredible. Well, it's a lesson on how to deal with the level of ignorance and bigotry and violence that I experienced, yes, in Shiraz, but that is no different from the level of bigotry, violence, and ignorance that is worldwide, all over the place, regardless if you are in Florida or if you are in Queensland. Yes. So as I was trying to negotiate my position, because where I was outside one of the most extraordinary mosques ever built, is the mausoleum, a mosque and funerary monument to somebody called the Shah Sherag, built in the 12th century, and is better known as the Mirror Mosque. And that's where we were going. And somehow you had men going from an entrance, women going from another entrance. I got separated from my dad and the professor. Maybe I tried to go a little bit further. But all of a sudden, as the shouting of the single individual was everybody else was listening, all young clerics, all would-be clerics, my savior, they guide himself by the name of Reza. He pushed them away in a very violent way. And off the shirt, he showed them a pendant. And that pendant was one of the letters from the Quran. And he started reciting the Quran. And even in English, he was saying what the Quran says about hospitality, what the Quran says about the treatment of strangers, what the Quran says about the people that are unaware of your customs. Aren't you ashamed? And the crowd opened, and the hateful young clerics bent their head down and withdrew, so that I could myself get inside, take off my shoes, and kneel in front of this extraordinary cultural place that was this mosque, where the whole ceiling and the walls were covered in reflective mirrors. What a scene! And wherever I went, the warmth of the people and the beauty of the place, as we travel extensively across Iran, because we had this introduction by the president himself that opened doors that have not been open to tourists since the time of the Ayatollah Khomeini took over in 1979. We went everywhere, and the hospitality was extraordinary. And to top up this incredible experience, as through the years I met people of Iranian background who were born overseas and they never had the chance to go back and visit Iran, their ancestral home, when I could tell them that I did visit, that I did go everywhere, and that I had a fantastic time, and that the people are just extraordinary and beautiful and really no different from us. I can see them opening up and really warm up to me, so that even my heart, or whatever I have somewhere there, some doubt that I have any, feels a certain happiness and warmth in being able to share with them how much I loved their country. And so all this tied up with my discovery of the 1,000 Nights. and how much later I discover this extraordinary character that was Sir Richard Francis Burton. And I went through some of his writings, some of his translation, and he was the first Westerner who was able to disguise himself to go to Mecca during the annual pilgrimage. So the first one to give a full recount of the 19th century, what was to be there walking around the Kabbalah. This was the character, and the details and the erotism that were in his writing was truly extraordinary. And it reminded me that when I was 15, 16, my grandfather, who was already a book dealer, a map dealer, somebody specialized in maps and atlas, among many other things, had shown me, as he was selling to my mum, some watercolors that captured my imagination, that they were depicting some scene for the 1001 Nights. And I had to have it. And I got them from him. And in this case, because they were original watercolors and signed by the author, I have to pay. And as it happens, the wonderful painter of these watercolors that you'll see here was no other than the daughter of the last Viceroy, English Viceroy of Egypt. And she made these drawings in 1911, 1912. And there is a signature with the date. And so I can just imagine what Egypt must have been in 1910, turn of the century. And so, what else can I add to make my story more compelling? But since I was in Shiraz, I can only end with a short poem by one of the most celebrated poets of Persia, Azaz, who said, "In the sky where we live is no place to lose your wings. So love, love, love."